Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Fat Muscle Project podcast. I'm John Gorman, your host. Once again, as always, we've got Miss Lisa in the house. Lisa, what's going on? How are you?
I'm doing very, very well. I'm excited for this conversation today. I know it's going to be very valuable.
Yeah, this is a topic to where when you think you've heard everything, there's always something that you can learn from a podcast like this. This isn't going to be a super long one, but this is going to be valuable because I think this is one of the most underrated topics
Hmm.
that's out there in the dieting world in general. So I'm excited to really talk about this. And our guest today, which we're going to introduce, and he's going to introduce himself, is really kind of the person that brought this to the forefront, in my opinion. But we'll get to that here in just a little bit. Will, welcome to the show, man. You are not someone that's unfamiliar with Lisa and myself. I've been on your podcast. You and I have done YouTube videos together. Ask a Diet Coach. You've been on Lisa's podcast. Welcome back, man.
Yeah, I guess I'm not a stranger anymore, right? I
Yeah.
really appreciate y'all for having me on the show. Thank you very much for reaching out to me. And obviously, I'm very excited to talk about this topic that I know has been in circulation in the health and fitness coaching space for over 10 years now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tell everybody a little bit about yourself real quick, and then we're both going to talk about how we know you and how we've met you.
Yeah, sure. So my name is William Grazione. I have a bachelor's degree in nutrition and exercise science. I am a husband to my amazing wife, Tanya Grazione. We have four children. We live in Tampa, Florida. In a previous life, I was a professional natural bodybuilder, both nationally and internationally. And I do like to have a more emphasis when I coach people on the importance of insulin sensitivity, stress management, and fat loss.
Yeah, that's so crucial. And the cool thing is, since we're going to talk about how we both know you, the first thing you said in a previous life. So, like, you and I are old school, right? You look all trim, like you look like you're 34 right now, right? Lisa, she's young. She
I
just looks
appreciate
amazing,
that.
always, right? I'm old man over here, 48 years old. In a previous life, you and I have been around for a long time. And I first met you on the message boards back in the day. And I remember your physique. I remember you being a professional. And then over time, I watched you become a coach. And it wasn't more about you as an athlete, it was as a coach. And man, you were getting people amazing, solid results. And then here comes the content. And I learned quite a bit from you just watching your content and hearing you speak. And then you and I got together and became friends right around 2017, 18 when I came to
Mm-hmm.
Tampa. We recorded some YouTube videos together. You took me fishing, which was a blast. I had never done that down there in Florida, and just developed this really, really good friendship. And whenever I talk about the best coaches in the industry, people up there at the top, I put you up there at the top because of your knowledge and your experience. So how long have you been doing this?
Yeah, so I guess officially since 2011, but prior to that, it was basically I got started around 2009. I was still in academia, so I hadn't graduated yet. And, in all honesty, it started because my final year in college, they basically had us take on five clients, and we had to create full client case studies on those five clients and basically help them transform. I had no idea that coaching was even a thing in 2009 or 2010 until I had the privilege of meeting my first mentor, Dr. Lane Norton, which I'm sure everybody knows Lane.
Yeah.
And come to find out at that time, I was having some issues in my classes because I had questions and my professors didn't have the answers. And so I began to scour the internet. And back then, the only two gentlemen that I could find was Dr. Joe Klemczewski and Lane. Kind of a third, I saw some stuff from Skip LaCour as well as Dave Gooden, I believe. And
Yeah,
those are
yeah.
like the only four guys that I happen to gravitate towards, primarily because I had this background in exercise science and everything that they were talking about from a bodybuilding perspective, it made sense. But everything that I was hearing that I should do, John, it just didn't make any sense to me because of the education that I had. So officially, that's kind of when it all got started. It was about 2010, and Lane was really the pioneer. He was the light for me. And I could probably speak for a lot of other people when I say that he was the light for them as well, because before I met him, I had no idea that this could turn into a career, that this could be something that you could do. And I was helping a lot of people on the side. And I believe I had, before I even charged anybody $1, I think I had already helped 4 or 5 people turn pro. And then at that point in time, I was like, I need to be able to do this. But again, Lane was the guy who showed me that it was possible. And within the next 12 months, I built a business, and here we are 15 years later.
Yeah, and I know we're going to talk about diet breaks, but I want to nerd out here for just a minute, because if we're talking about going back in time, the people that really laid the groundwork to be able to do this stuff online was first Dr. Joe, was kind of really like the original, quickly followed by Lane, because Lane worked with
Yep.
Joe.
Yep.
And they were the ones that really showed people, well, one, they were figuring out, but showed people, hey, here's how you can diet people using
Mm-hmm.
email, like
Mm-hmm.
online. And they
Yep.
had to convince people that it was possible. And then quickly after that were guys like me, Jason Theobald, you, Cliff Wilson, like kind of that next wave that were still early adopters, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And because Lane had already kind of proved that it was possible, I jumped on board. Theobald jumped on board. And then it wasn't as hard to get people, but it was still tough. We had to talk people into it. Now, these days, like all of us that have kind of been doing this for close to 20 years, now people that diet people online and have an online coaching business, like we were the ones that kind of like made that possible. And I really gave Lane a shout out. Well, one, I picked him up in St. Louis to be on my podcast back in the day at First Form. And before I dropped off the airport, I just had a moment with him and I said, hey, man, I just want to tell you, thank you. I don't think you realize, but people like us are making a lot of money because you figured out how to do this. So thank you. And I know that meant a lot to him.
Yeah.
So definitely want to give him his flowers, because that's important. So, and then Lisa, you know Will, because you've had him on your podcast. Talk about your podcast too as well, because other people love to listen to good content. So we've got that to share as well.
Yeah, so my podcast, the Nutrition and Life podcast, is really where I talk more about Gen Pop coaching, etc. And I work specifically a lot with women, sort of between 35 and 55. And through that, I want to provide a lot of good information when it comes to hormonal health as well. And as many of them go through the menopause transition, of course, your name popped up, Will, because you are also very passionate in talking about hormonal health and just in general, nourishing our bodies throughout that time even more so. So I really, really enjoyed our conversation a few months ago. And yeah, it's always good to connect with people that have the knowledge and the application, and then on top of that, experience as well. So yes, it was a very, for me, a very valuable conversation. I had a lot of good feedback for our interview.
Go ahead and take it away, Lisa. We've got a great show lined up. Let's dig in.
Perfect. Yes, I'm excited to talk about our topic today, diet breaks. So, Will, I'd love to hear from you. What does that actually mean to you, that term? How is it used? How do you use it in your practice with your clients or perhaps even with yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I think it's taken a few different like definitions over the years. So again, like I started doing these back in about 2014 was the first time I started to experiment with them, and I'll explain why that is a little bit later. But I believe a diet break is basically a form of a recovery technique from chronic low calorie dieting. And by definition, I would say that a diet break is a very intentional break from the low calorie, calorie restriction over time. So whether that's you being placed into a 25% calorie restriction, a 30% calorie restriction, a 35% calorie restriction, whatever that may be. Our goal is basically during the diet break to fill the energy gap that's creating fat oxidation, primarily with carbohydrate, to drive some of these metabolic cofactors, such as increasing leptin and fueling your thyroid health. And the way that I think about the diet break, and I first talked about this with Dr. Bill Campbell from USF. We all know Bill. We love Bill. He's awesome. But I first talked to him in 2000. I think it was one of Lane's camps in either 2014 or 2015. And he had heard that I was using diet breaks, and he came up to me and we started talking about it. And on a podcast I did with him, I kind of dropped the way that I think about it. And it's a sports analogy, which if anybody's ever played sports here, especially now that it's football season, I coined it as the halftime analogy, right? So just as a reference, you play your first quarter, you play your second quarter. By the end of the second quarter, you're starting to get kind of tired. The reality is you probably made some mistakes on the field, right? You've learned through a few things. And again, maybe there's an injury went down or just something's happening. If you implement the halftime, you now have this tremendous opportunity, in my opinion, to review what's worked, review what hasn't worked, talk it over with your coach. If there's any issues going on in training, maybe you're feeling stiff, your joints are tight, anything like that, you can implement this diet break basically as a means to help reset you, specifically reset your cortisol response. And then you can finish the second half of the fat loss phase with a newfound energy because you actually gave your body what it truly needed, which is a full week off.
Amazing. Yeah, that's I think it's a really good analogy actually. And for those that don't quite know, like what exactly do you mean by diet break in the sense of a practical term? Do we go straight to maintenance? Do you just like slowly increase? Is it specifically through
Yeah.
carbs and fats, or how is it applied?
That's a really good question. So I think a diet break or like a maintenance level, depending on how much weight you lose, is kind of like a moving target. So the maintenance level that an individual may have at 200 pounds likely may not be the same maintenance level that they would have at 180, at 160, at 140. So I will readjust calories back up to their theoretical maintenance level at that specific time. Basically, like I said, just by filling the energy gap. So whatever gap we created to create the opportunity for fat oxidation, I will fill that back up primarily with glucose. And I don't want to take full credit for this either, even though I was kind of one of the early people that brought this, kind of to light. But I want to give credit to Alberto Nunez, primarily because it was 2013 or 2014. He had released a study, or at least it was like a screenshot of a study. And it was focused on women that were going through fat loss phases, and they had actually implemented a 48 to 72-hour refeed period. And what it showed was that over the course of between the 48 and 72 hours, FSH and LH, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, actually began to send more hormone pulsatility back to progesterone. And so I'm like, well, I'm working with a lot of ladies. Why not try this out? Let's try 3 days. And 3 days worked so well. I'm like, well, let's try 5. And 5 days worked so well. I'm like, let's just go a whole damn week here. And then
Yeah.
when I started to implement it, what I did was I said, I need to gather some data here because I don't know anybody else that's doing this. So what I did was I just created a Word doc. I had an old, I don't even know what kind of computer I used, some kind of HP deal. And I made a Word doc and I said, I want you to answer these questions authentically and just how you feel right now. Because back then, a lot of my clients, they were just bodybuilders, competition prep. They're competing in figure, bodybuilding, all that. And so I said, fill these questions out. I want truthful responses. How do you feel right now? And then we went ahead and we, made the adjustments to the nutrition, some supplementation, cardio, training. And then I had them fill it back out a week later. And all of them said how much better they felt. They felt this new wave of life. They felt like all the fatigue that they had accumulated was gone. If they had sleep problems already, their sleep had improved. So I said, well, it works so good. Why would I change this? Implement the halftime analogy. So for a lot of clients that I was working with from 2015 to probably all the way up until even now, I'm still implementing them now. But over the last, what's it been, 10 years? Yeah, 8 to 10 years or so. I like to be very proactive with the implementation of this break because I don't want people walking across stage feeling like a dead zombie. I'd rather them feel as fresh and refreshed as possible. Granted, for a natural bodybuilder to get down to single digit body fat, that's not easy at all. But I do believe that by them being able to have this intentional break in between the diet, they can essentially have more energy and feel better, less metabolically adapted when they walk across stage or at the end of a fat loss phase.
Can I add something real quick?
Yeah,
So I
please.
just added this to our show notes. You're talking about people stepping across stage. That's not going to be a lot of people listening to the show, but it's going to
Okay.
be enough. Well, first of all, you do deserve a ton of credit because it's guys like you. I know Alberto shared a couple day, refeed
Yeah.
approach,
Yeah.
but you were the one that extended this out into a week. You're the one that did this and really kind of made people start paying attention, which led to Dr. Bill Campbell doing the research, right? So like
Yeah.
it's
I
people that are
appreciate that.
early and pioneers like you that and it's kind of like me and the refeeds and other people with the refeeds. It caused people like Bill Campbell to come back and say, "Hey, we need to study this." So
Yeah.
research is always years later, sometimes decades later. So you deserve that. But back to bodybuilding preps. You had mentioned how you didn't want your people walking across stage feeling like a zombie, which is very, very accurate. Since I've learned about diet breaks, really from you, I was kind of a late adopter, like 2018's really when I
Mm,
started.
yeah.
Since then, my peak weeks, they're diet breaks. Like
Mm,
they're mostly a diet break because of all the things you said. They look
hmm.
better because cortisol's down. We
Hmm.
fill them back out. They
Yep.
tighten up. Like you do all the things that really work, but we'll get more into that later. Were you noticing that too with your
Oh
bodybuilders?
my gosh. So whenever I was working with clients in the bodybuilding context, and we're going to talk more Gen Pop context later. So for those of you who are Gen Pop, hang out, stay up for a while. But in the bodybuilding context, what I was noticing was that people that had already competed before working with me, I saw their stage photos. I saw how lean they got. And keep in mind, back then, there was not a lot of very well respected coaches.
Right.
So for what it's worth, there was maybe less than 10 of us, right? And we're
Yeah.
coaching people all around the United States of America. And I would look at their pictures and I would say, man, I really think I can get you leaner than this.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing was is that I didn't necessarily have to push them harder to get them leaner. And that was the first time my mind was blown because I remember going to a friend of mine's house, which I pulled up at his house and I'm like, dude, look at these clients. He's like, holy shit, I worked with them and they didn't get this lean. And I'm like, dude,
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's the diet break. Like it's the
Yeah.
management of the stress or something's going on. At the time, I didn't know. I just
Right.
knew that they felt so much better coming out of it. And if they felt refreshed coming out of it, then they're basically recharged for the last 8 to 10 weeks of a prep. And when I tell you, this is when I started to get guys with strided glutes and we started to see girls get that nice glute ham tie in and all of that.
Yeah.
That's when
Yeah.
it started.
Wow. Super
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, in terms of the application, even more so, I'm curious when exactly you suggested, and you mentioned you really like a proactive approach to that. So I guess with more Gen Pop clients also, let's just say, do you specifically in the beginning talk to them and say, hey, after 12 weeks, let's do a diet break after, or like, what's your approach in terms of periodization?
Yeah. So I think a diet break in and of its sense, like in and of itself, it should be looked at as a proactive tool that every nutrition coach has at their disposal. If you remember back then, John, a lot of people were starting to talk about this diet fatigue and tracking fatigue and all these things. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, what can we do to offset that level of fatigue? And this is where I feel like, the idea of doing more of a phasic diet actually shines. Especially with clients that have a lot of fat to lose. Okay. So you could think about the idea that we've all worked with people that have probably had to lose over 100 pounds, right? And if I tell you, hey, I'm going to keep you in a constant calorie restriction for over 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, that's a daunting task for anybody, right? And so now what I like to do for anybody that comes in that probably needs to lose 30, 40, or even 50 pounds, I will basically create a diet timeline. So, like, think about like a 1 year timeline of, hey, we're going to push really hard here. We're going to drop your first 20. We're going to lose a diet break. We're going to drop another 20. We're going to use a diet break. We're going to drop another 20. And the really cool thing, and where I feel like these probably shine the most, is the obese person, which obviously for everybody listening to this, it's a very important stat. And with so much talk around like insulin sensitivity and all of these things and these diet modalities and the implementation of keto and metabolic flexibility and all this amazing stuff, the really good news here is that most overweight people actually fear eating higher amounts of food.
Yep.
Okay. So you diet them and they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, I lost 20 pounds. This is amazing. I've lost 30 pounds. This is amazing. And then you tell them they get to eat more. Well, hold on a second. I don't want to
Yep.
eat more because eating more got me there. I'm
Yeah.
like, no, you don't understand. We're going to implement this break intentionally so that you're a lot less likely to ever want to binge later on. And this is where I feel like they can be very, very helpful is the fact that you always have something to look forward to. And you're actually training the overweight person that they can get their calories back up to their theoretical maintenance level without gaining back the fat that they already lost.
Yeah, so it's even a mental tool as well, like and a tool for a healthy relationship with food, which I think is often or not often enough talked about, really.
I'll go out on a limb and I'll say based off of the literature, based off of my application, I would say it's probably more like a psychological benefit than a physiological benefit because we all know you can diet folks down, and as long as you're in a calorie restriction, they're going to oxidize body fat most of the time, unless their stress hormones just get so out of whack that the body kind of starts to resist them, right?
Yeah.
Like we've seen individuals that are on very low calorie intakes and their blood sugar starts to go up. And it's like,
Yeah.
what's going on there? And
Right.
then we implement a diet break and we'll see the blood sugars drop.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I'm eating more carbs. How
Yep.
does my blood sugar drop after I eat more carbs? And so the stress management aspect is something that I believe would be relatively challenging for those in academia to study. However, I think the stress management aspect of it, the female hormone pulsatility aspect of it, as well as the longevity of helping people lose, 60, 70, 80 to 100 plus pounds, when they know they got that diet break, I'm telling you, like they work harder during the times when it's a fat loss time. And then they're more accepting of the fact that they can eat more and they have a healthier metabolism when they take the break and they don't gain all their weight back. So right now I've worked with my own mom, and I'm just going to talk about my family so that I don't like name drop anybody. And they're like, hey, I heard you talk about me on the podcast. But I work with my own mom, and my mom was a type 2 insulin using diabetic for the better part of my adult life. And when I learned how to actually help her, we started her off on keto because her blood sugar was so high. She was having glycemic attacks, and her doctor was just giving her more and more insulin, and I obviously knew that that wasn't going to be the fix. She ended up losing 110 pounds, but I started her off on keto and then I used a diet break,
Yeah.
keto, diet break, keto, diet break, keto. Over the course of time, 2 years later, she loses 110 pounds. 3 years later, she's maintained 100 pounds of that loss,
Wow.
right? On another side, I've looked at my own sister's blood work, and my sister had very similar genetics to my mom. And my sister, thank God she brought me her blood work because I was able to actually open up her file. I took a look at it and I said, sis, if you'd have taken this to anybody else, you'd have been leaving that doctor's office with insulin and metformin, right? And she's
Yep.
like, what do you mean? I'm like, you're a type 2 diabetic. She's like, holy shit. And at the time, she was about, I think she was pushing probably 270, maybe 280, somewhere around there. And we're about the same height. So 5'9", 280, obviously, that's not very healthy. I've been working with her now for about 9 months, and she's down to 195, and we're not done yet. Just the other
Yeah.
day, I got an email from her, and she was like, "I haven't been under 195 since I had her daughter. I'm not going to name drop her daughter's name, but it'd been over 12 years."
Yeah.
And she's like, I haven't been this light in 12. And I was like, listen, the way that you're dieting matters. And she's tried every crash diet on the planet, low calories, eating out of the little Tupperware things, everything. And because we're implementing these kind of call them metabolic, optimization strategies or stress management strategies, she's been able to constantly lose body fat over time. Now, I understand that not every case is going to be as cut and dry as that. But I think that for a lot of people that struggle with losing a lot of weight and then gaining it all back, I think this is the tool that can actually help them get the weight off and actually keep the weight off.
Mhm.
Yeah. This makes me think, if you don't mind, I'm going to share a real quick example on my end.
Yeah.
First time that the light switch really went off for me, I had I had talked to you, I had learned more about this, but I had never done it. And I'm like, all
Mm-hmm.
right, shit, here we go. So I had a lady named Debbie,
Mm-hmm.
and had her all the way down at 1,200 calories, very high stress, very high stress.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this was a contest prep, but still high stress.
Yeah.
She was almost 50 years old, battling through menopause and all that. And I'm trying to diet her down to stage. she got to the point on 1,200 calories and an hour of cardio a day, which I know some people do 2 hours. My clients never get there because I'll
Hmm.
use a diet break before I'll go there, right? But
Yeah.
anyway, she had 3 weeks to go, and I needed to get another 2 or 3 pounds off her. And not, every time I drop her calories, raise her cardio, she would actually gain a little bit or not lose
Hmm.
at all. And I was like, okay, this is not good. I'm like, damn it, I'm going to do this. Like Will's been talking about it. He told me how to do it. I'm going to do this diet break. So for a whole week, all I did was bump her up 50 carbs. Now, when you say 50 carbs to someone, they lose their mind. That's only 200 calories. I
Right.
only bumped her up to 1,400 calories. So I told her,
Right.
I was like, you're not going to gain fat on this. And I was telling myself, God, I hope she doesn't gain any weight on this. So yeah, I knew she wouldn't gain fat, but I didn't want her to see the scale go up from 50 carbs a day. But it's only 200 calories. And then I pulled all of her cardio out cold turkey. And I had been
Hmm.
doing that for a while, right? So
Yeah.
I knew
I
pulling all
I
your steady
remember us
state out.
talking about that.
Yeah. What happened was she lost 2 to 3 pounds that week, looked tighter, and it was because of the cortisol response, right?
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
from there, I put her cardio back in. I only put it at 20 minutes a day after that. I'm like, listen, we don't need to go back to an hour a day. And then I kind of carb cycled her. I dropped her carbs back down, but then I'd have like high carb. That's not the important part. That was when the light switch went off to me. So the reason I bring this up is I use it personally when people are at that point where it's like they're starting to go backwards or they're so fatigued they're not going to be
Yeah.
able to stick to the plan. And that's
Yeah.
that's really where I use it. Is that where you recommend most people start, or do you like to say, hey, just plan it out and like every 12 weeks, every 16 weeks have one? I don't think there's a wrong answer, but I know you
Right.
get asked that a lot. So what's your response to that?
Yeah. So, it's like I think coaching in and of itself is an art form, right? So like when you're trying new stuff, it's like you could give an artist a pen and a paper and tell them to draw a truck, and you could tell all of us to draw a truck. All of our trucks are going to look a little bit different. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yes, I would even say that for that specific gal that was going through probably the perimenopause transition, or she was already postmenopausal, if you would have checked her blood sugar during that time, you probably would have saw that her glucose was probably climbing. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a phenomenal time to use them. And I'll drop another case study real quick. I'm working with a gal right now that's 4 weeks out from competing in the NPC and about 7 weeks out from competing at the Tampa Natural Show here. And when I tell you, John, she was stalled out at 127 pounds. I mean, she had 127-pound weigh-ins for 2 weeks in a row, and she's like, "I'm about to throw in the towel. This sucks."
Yeah.
And I said, "Listen, what are you doing this weekend?" She's like, "Well, I'm traveling down to Fort Lauderdale. I got a wedding. I got this stuff going on." And I'm like, "All right, this is what I want you to do. Use this diet break, pull back on training a little bit, maybe just go for some longer walks, spend time with your husband, enjoy the festivities of the wedding." And I gave her more calories. And in her specific scenario, I gave her probably 400, 500 ish more calories per day because I
Yeah.
knew that she was very insulin sensitive. I knew she could handle it.
Yeah.
And within she got back. That was a week. 3 weeks later, she was down to I think 122 or 123. So this was
Wow.
like a 4 or 5 pound drop over the next 3 weeks of being in calorie restriction. And then she stalls out again at like 122. I said, damn it, Jackie, it worked once. Let's do it again.
Yeah.
Did it again. Now she's down to like 118. And now she's starting to get the really nice shape in her glutes and her hamstrings. But without those breaks, I mean, we probably would have just been stuck. And so, in her case, I think we've done three of them in a row. And every time we implement it, she drops 2 to 3 more pounds, which from a physique coach, you guys know the difference 2 or 3 pounds makes. I mean, that's a difference between winning and not even being in the first call out, you know?
Right. Right.
And so, yes, I think that there's a really good time and place. I would also say that for women that are battling, weight loss resistance or something like that in their 40s and their 50s, I think that having shorter bouts of aggressive fat loss is actually a really good idea. So maybe
Yeah.
pushing them pretty hard for like 3 to 4 days, and then you have a refeed or back to back refeeds. I think that they respond better to that because as the human physiology ages, typically you become less and less resilient to that stress.
Yeah, that's a really
Yeah.
good point, I'm interested to hear if like what research do we have now to actually back that up? Because you mentioned initially it was more like, one study posted, I'm going to try that. And by now, in the
Mhm.
last 10 odd years, what research
Yeah.
do we have?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of research that basically kind of comes to the conclusion that, there's really not a benefit physiologically. I think if you dive into a little bit more of like the hormone cascade, I think that you could potentially see glucose specifically be able to aid in some of these hormones that actually calm the female physiology, such as serotonin and GABA. Those are the happy hormones in the female physiology. I'd also say that you could reverse all the way back to 2013, 14 when I saw Alberto post that screenshot. And it's like, if you want to protect the female's reproductive system during an aggressive fat loss phase, it's actually a really good idea to potentially implement them maybe 3 to 5 days when they're leading into their period. Because what I noticed when I was dieting a lot of gals for a bodybuilding competition, and even now when I'm working with a lot more Gen Pop folks, I noticed that if they are going to lose their period, it'll basically go from having a normal period, normal 5 day heavy cycle, then it's a little bit lighter, maybe 4 days, and it's a little bit lighter, maybe 3 days. And then it gets down and they're just kind of spotty. Then they're like, hey, Will, just want to let you know I kind of had a spotty cycle. Okay, next month when your cycle comes, I'm going to implement a diet break. And we're basically going to have a diet break for 1 week out of the 4. And let's see if you get your cycle. And I can tell you that they get their period back. And so even back then, 2014, 2015, I had to learn that what I was trying to manage was cortisol and progesterone with the female physiology. And I felt that if I managed that well, then women actually wouldn't lose their periods going into a bodybuilding show. Now, there's a whole host of people out there that'll say, well, they don't need their period when they're competing in bodybuilding, in which I would say, look, okay, yes, they're not judged on their health when they walk across stage. But here's what I can tell you is that if they can keep their cycle for longer going into the fat loss and even walking across stage or ending the fat loss, even if they lose it for a month, it is so much easier to get it back. I can
Yeah.
tell you, I've helped so many women that went without a period for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, because they stayed stuck in that hamster wheel of just compete, fat loss, compete, fat loss, compete, fat loss, compete, and they never get their hormones back. And then somebody like either myself, you, John, or somebody else would have to come in and say, listen, you need to take a whole year off.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
John, one
then they
thing.
get their
Oh,
hormones
sorry.
back and then they feel better again. And the really cool thing about that is that it actually makes future fat loss phases a
Mm.
lot easier on them. So, like, the idea is your first fat loss phase, you got freaking shredded, you looked amazing. The second one, a little bit harder, you had to get more aggressive, and maybe you didn't get as lean. The third one, more aggressive, maybe you didn't get as lean. And then, but usually by the fourth, fifth, or sixth fat loss phase, you're just throwing up your hands and you're like, F this, I don't even want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, John, you put so many people on stage, and one thing I really love about your practice is how adamant you are about getting people healthy or making sure that they are healthy enough to compete even beforehand. And then as soon as they're done competing, you're like so diligent with blood work and even like having the conversations with people of like, hey, we really should take a 1.5 year off season, 2 year off
Yeah.
season, whatever. That's something I have admired about your practice ever since we met. And it sounds like Will, you go about it in a very similar way with health focus in mind as well. And you mentioned
Yeah.
a few times training as well. Like so, for example, that girl that went to the wedding, you told her to pull back on training and to go for walks and such. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. Like, what is the practice during a diet break when it comes to strength training, cardio, everything around that?
Yeah, so I think with everything with regards to like a coaching view, right? Like everything is context dependent, right? So let's just say, for instance, you have one of your female clients or even a male client, right? And they're like, hey, well, I got this like nagging knee thing going on. My back's kind of feeling sore all the time. My hips are tight and all this. Um, in all honesty, I think probably a good idea to just maybe pull back or not train for maybe 2 or 3 days just to allow everything to properly recover. Normally, what I'll do is I like to actually take the intensity back a little bit, or I'll drop the volume, depending on which one I feel like is kind of driving the issue. Most of the time, I think issues are created because of excess volume that's unrecoverable. I don't think it's necessarily the intensity per se, as much as I will pull back on the volume because I don't want them to lose strength. And if we happen to back off on the intensity of the exercise, the literature that I remember reading back in academia was like, if you don't lift for 10 days, you could lose up to 10% of your total strength. Right. So that would be the equivalent of, a gal that could squat 300. Maybe she's only squatting 270 to 250 if she takes 10 full days off. Obviously, I don't want that to happen because then you're like, I used a diet break and I got weaker. It's like, no, we're not going to pull training out completely. We're going to keep you on your normal routine. But what I would like to see you do is actually just cut the volume in half. So as an example, if they're doing, 3 sets of 12, that would equate to, 36 reps of a specific weight. I would say, let's just do 18 reps and let's just do 2 sets of 9. Right. So they're not going to that crazy intensity of the 12. They're stopping at 9, but they're using the same load.
Yeah, I like that. I like that you're making sure that they're maintaining their strength and just in general, again, individualizing the approach as well. So when it comes to cardio, then like whether that be steps or list cardio or hit cardio, I don't know what your normal practice is. What do you do
Yeah.
there?
I got to tell you, so I used to be very pro hit cardio. And I think that was the athlete in me. It was like the college football player. Like, man, if you could put a sled on me and let me strap on my cleats and pull a sled, I felt like that was incredible. However, in my last prep, and this was a long time ago, like I said, previous life when I was a professional bodybuilder, 2012, I prepped and I turned professional in the IFPA, competed against a really good natural bodybuilder. And that whole prep, I mean, my hips hurt, my knees hurt, and I was doing hit cardio 2 to 3 days a week, and I was training legs twice. And the reality is that for anybody who's ever really done hit cardio, whether that be on like a spin bike or pushed a sled or sprinted, y'all know, I mean, you're basically like training legs 5 days a week, if you're doing 3 hit cardio sessions. And so I think one of the biggest things that I think has been brought to light is the reality that you don't have to do that in order to get as lean as you need to get in order to be able to either walk across stage or achieve your fat loss goals. A lot of my clients now, 2025, after doing this for a very long time, most of them are amazed at the body composition that they can acquire without feeling like they have to work their face off. Most of the gals that I'm coaching right now, their resistance training in an appropriate amount for them. And I say an appropriate amount for them because most of the time women are finding their favorite fitness influencer online and they're like, try my free 6-day, program, whatever. And they're training glutes like 4 days a week and they don't have any days off, or, it's the idea that, you have to train every day and all this kind of thing. Most of the gals I'm working with, in a Gen Pop context are doing between 3 and 4 workouts per week. Even the females that I'm working with that want to step on stage or look like they could, usually I'm capping them around 4 to 5, and I'm addressing recoverability every week. So I have a pretty robust biofeedback tracker. And I'm always asking them, how do you feel? How do your joints feel? How's like your overall well-being? How's your body feel? So on and so forth. Because if I notice over the course of a few weeks, I go from like a green block. So I like to color code everything. So I go like green block, and then I see that tightness and fatigue start to go up to like a 6 or a 7. I'll put a yellow in there. And then if I see it get up to like an 8, I'll go red. And then when I know it goes red, I'm like, okay, I have to make an adjustment, because what they're basically doing is they're carrying fatigue from week to week to week to week because there's a lack of focus on recovery. And so, and again, that could be just due to an excessive amount of stress, or maybe they're just not resilient enough to recover from it. So, usually what I like to do with cardio is I'll just usually back it down. I'll keep the step count pretty much status quo. I'll keep the step count, kind of like a standardized level of activity. I think all human beings should be walking. But it's pretty interesting. And I'm sure we all know this, but the amount of people that, are working a desk job and they fill out your online application and they're only doing 2,000 or 3,000 steps per day is mind boggling, right? John's like, yeah, it's me. In all honesty, John, like if I didn't have my family to hold me accountable to like walking the dog and taking the kids
Yeah.
for a walk at the end of the day, I'd probably be around that 3 to 4,000 step count too.
Yeah.
But you add that one half an hour walk in there, you're adding 3,000 steps onto that. Now we're at 7, 8,000. So,
Yeah.
in all honesty, I think that's usually what I think is pretty good. I'm not a big advocate of high intensity interval cardio anymore, unless I get somebody who's like, they still want to have that like athletic edge. And in all honesty, yes, you do have to promote more of like the fast twitch neurological signaling to keep those fast twitch fibers there. But I think that most people dramatically overdo it, right? So they hear something is good and they're like, well, I got to do it every day now. And it's like, no, you don't. Keep that tool for when we may need the tool. But now you go between a kind of a hybrid model of low intensity steady state cardio and miss. And then if I need to, increase step count, I will do that as well. But I like to keep step count as the non-exercise activity thermic effect of that. But then the added cardio, it would be like, hey, Lisa, I just want you doing 8,000 steps per day. On top of the 8,000 steps per day, though, because we're in a fat loss phase and the goal is fat oxidation, I want you to implement a 30-minute low intensity steady state cardio session the day after your high carb day. You'd be like, oh, okay, why is that, Will? And then I'll go ahead and I'll explain that so that they can understand the rationale as to why I'm saying it. And then most of the time that works really, really good. And again, I'm not really like pro super high intensity interval cardio anymore. I do like to cycle between like spin, walking, swimming, jogging, those types of things. But even for some women, I found that the jogging actually can cause some negative health issues as well. So most of the time, it's more parasympathetic cardio during like a deload or a diet break.
Awesome. Yeah. And John and I were both huge fans of walking and keeping that in there always as well, even just for blood sugar regulation,
Oh yeah,
mental
huge.
clarity, like literally everything.
Yeah.
One more thing in regards to supplements, is there anything you change, add, or whatever when it comes to diet breaks?
That's a really good question. Obviously, I think everybody is very pro supplementation now,
Yeah.
especially with the implementation of functional medicine into evidence-based nutrition coaching and learning how these supplements actually interact with our physiology. I would say probably one of the biggest things that I notice is most people, because they're chronically stressed out from low calorie dieting or something like that, keep in mind that when you're battling really high stress situations in life, that you actually dump more magnesium out. So normally what I like to do is I like to increase magnesium the deeper we get into a fat loss phase.
Interesting.
I think it helps with the gastric emptying effect that typically can be negatively influenced. So for people that were going to the bathroom every day, before fat loss started, and then maybe they've dropped 20 pounds of body fat and maybe their bowel movements start to slow down a little bit. I think that the diet break concept can work really good there too, just to get the bowels going again. But I will maybe start people off around 3 to 500 milligrams of usually like a combination between magnesium glycinate, magnesium bicarbonate, or maybe even magnesium citrate, and just allow that to basically help to keep their bowels healthy as well as to manage stress and cortisol. Um, Usually 3 to 500 is where I start, but it's not abnormal for me to maybe get up around like 800 every now and then if they happen to be a very stressed out person. Ashwagandha is something I use pretty often, unless it's somebody that has some type of an autoimmune flare or something like that. I will not use it there because it can actually be stimulatory. And then I would say if I need to like knock them out at nighttime, because oftentimes we know how important sleep is. If I had to pull one lever, I'd be like, dude, just try to sleep more.
Exactly.
I remember even back in the bodybuilding days, most of the clients would check in on Saturday mornings. And I would be like, you sleep as much as possible Friday night and
Yeah.
then check your weight Saturday morning. And like clockwork, they would look their best, they would sleep their best, they'd have the best bowel movement, they would feel good, that they would look good. And that's usually what I like to do. So I'll implement some melatonin, sometimes like 5 to 10 milligrams, but usually I don't go over that. I also think this is just a bonus. I also think that during the diet break, I think it's a good opportunity for you to reset your cortisol, reset your adrenals, right? So
Yeah.
oftentimes inside of a fat loss phase, you got people slamming pre-workouts, drinking a lot of coffee, monsters and all of that. And I'll be like, well, if you want that first cup of coffee feeling, and everybody here listening to this knows the first time you had a cup of coffee or a monster, you're like, holy shit, this is awesome. I want to work
Yeah.
out 4 times. I'll actually have them drop their caffeine for that diet break week. And then when we get back into it, I'll go ahead and I'll add back in like 100 to 150 milligrams pre-training.
I really
Yes.
like that tip. That's a super practical takeaway and strategy. Haven't considered that before. Makes a lot of sense. Um, I guess to kind of round it off here, because you've given us so much helpful information, but I'd love to hear what are some of the main mistakes you see people make when it comes to implementing diet breaks, like whether that's
Yeah. So
duration, the amount of food that they add, training, anything that comes to mind.
yeah, the best way to learn is to ask people the mistakes that they've made, right? I think the biggest mistake that most people make is the fact that they don't plan them out.
Hmm.
When I say people, I mean coaches don't plan them, and then a dieter that is planning on implementing one, they won't plan it, right? So therefore, what you have is you have an immediate placement of reaction, right? So I'm feeling burned out, my weight's stuck, I'm stalled. I don't know what to do. Oh God, now I need to implement this diet break. I've never used one before. I don't know what to expect. Blah blah blah. I think it's a better idea to be proactive as a coach, because if a client's listening to this, do you want a reactive coach? Somebody that's like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. It's like, you probably don't want that. And this is where I think wisdom inside of coaching, and coaching being an art, is very, very important. And so if you already know that your coach has kind of hinted that we're going to use one at some point in time, maybe they didn't give you exacts, and that's okay. I don't think you potentially have to, nor do I think you should. But the minute you start to see the trends really slowing down, I think that's a really good opportunity to go ahead and implement that before they stall out. That way you keep the trust, because the
Yeah.
amount of clients that I've seen that, and this is going on a little bit of a tangent here, but there are a lot of algorithmic like coaches that are out there. Like they just focus on an algorithm. You've got these really big coaching companies that are coaching hundreds of thousands of people. And it's just based off of an algorithm. And they
Yeah.
never program in these breaks. They never give high carb days. It's just you start at this many carbs, and then over the course of the fat loss, you just go down, 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 down until they stall, and then they stop seeing progress. They terminate the service, and then they have to hire one of us to actually guide them through that.
Right.
So I would much rather be proactive as a coach than be reactive, because I feel like it just helps the client hold that trust.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I think there's a couple of things to be said about that, because if it's or I think likewise we have seen with these bigger companies as well, where everyone, is always taking a diet break after 12 weeks. Well, sometimes
Mm,
people are just in the momentum. They're like, oh, I've just gotten the ball rolling. I've just gotten the hang of this, and now we're taking a
mhm.
diet break. Or then the diet break turns
Yeah.
into a cheat week or whatever.
Yeah.
That's not good either. Like as you said, strategy is always has to be personalized.
Yeah, I mean, or it could be the ones that just they don't pay it any attention because of what the science says,
Right. Yeah.
right? So therefore, they're very close-minded to it, and
Hmm.
therefore, you would have a gal that's been dieting for 4, 5, 6 months, and then all of a sudden she loses her period, and then you say, and then she's like, "Well, I lost my period," and you're like, "Just keep going."
Right.
Yeah.
That causes a lot of health issues too, because then eventually people like us have to come behind and clean up the mess.
So true.
Now, where I think that these strategies are going to be really powerful is, in the situation where a lot of people in the natural bodybuilding world, obviously we understand the human physiology, so like we implement them, but in the NPC and the IFBB and all of that, a lot of them are still dieting the same way that they
Yeah.
dieted 10 to 15 years ago. Now, primarily, it could just be in large part because they're dealing with the most genetic elite humans on the planet, and
Mhm.
they are very resilient. They can recover from anything. They're on performance enhancing drugs. But I think that if you were to implement some of these just to try them out, I think you'd be very impressed at the quality of life as well as the energy and the ability to recover at the end of the prep versus finishing the prep or finishing the show and then not knowing what to do afterwards when they're kind of complaining about all these various things. And then you happen to go get blood work on them and you see that their progesterone is like a 0.1. Probably a pretty good idea to manage this stuff so that that actually doesn't happen.
Mm.
I'm gonna ask you one thing. I know we're getting ready to
Yeah,
wrap up.
sure.
First of all, before I ask you this, because it's kind of a cool statement, I want to get your take on it. Before that, if you're listening, if you want to get a hold of Will, check out our show notes. All his contact information is there. My email, Lisa's email is there. If you guys want to hear any other guests, if you have questions to put on the show, any of that stuff, just check the show notes. We've got the breakdown of everything that we've talked about in order on the show notes as well. Will, real quick, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, since I've been doing these the last 7 to 8 years, mostly learned from your teachings, I have never had a diet break go negative.
Mm-hmm.
Never. I've always gotten either great results from it, and the absolute worst case, I've had a couple that just kind of maintained. But then
Mm-hmm.
after that, their fat loss picked back up. I've never had a bad experience or a negative reason to not do a diet break. What do you think about that statement coming from you? Because you've done these more than I have.
Yeah, I would agree with the statement. I think in the
Okay.
early onset of something new, I think the idea is we kind of like cross fingers, stay away. Like, no, I don't want anything new, And I can tell you that when I first started to bring this to people that were really close friends of mine that are also very knowledgeable coaches in the industry, they're like, nope, not doing it because the science does not support it. And I would say, okay, but I'm telling you that they work. Like I have the information to show it. I've never personally seen a negative come from it either, unless you try to use a diet break or a momentary, calorie maintenance with somebody that is extremely insulin resistant, and they're already very overweight, right?
Yeah.
So in those specific situations, obviously we're trying to improve insulin sensitivity to the best of our ability, kind of before we're adding in a bolus amount of carbs. I would say the only issues that I've personally ran into is if I didn't get them insulin sensitive enough before I implemented the diet break, in which sometimes their weight would maybe go 1, 2 pounds into the plus. But I've never seen a negative because immediately after that, they then drop
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, from a long term perspective, having used them, couldn't even tell you, but it's been 10 years worth of coaching. I have not seen a negative come from it unless it was applied incorrectly. So,
Yeah.
incorrectly applying it would be not trying to program it, not being proactive. And then the other one would be increasing calories too high.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right,
So
right.
with that being said, Lisa, you probably saw I just added to the very end of the show notes. For those people out there that they've heard all this information, hey, it works. Here's why it works. Here's some of the things to do with training and blah blah blah. If you can just give a real quick example, if someone's listening, on what to do. I think everybody knows what to do with cardio and training because we talked about that. But some people might be sitting there and they might be thinking, well, raise my calories. Like, what do I raise? Do I raise protein? Do I raise carbs? Do I raise fats? Can you just give someone a real quick example of maybe a certain amount of calories for a guy and a girl?
Yeah.
And what would they do with probably carbs, is I'm imagining what you're going to say, but just give us an example for our listeners.
Yeah, sure. So I can run through some generalities, but again, I'll go female and then I'll go male and I'll provide some
Okay.
calorie amounts so that you can kind of hopefully connect with the message because truthfully, most of the time women are required, and I say required, but keep in mind that this could be a woman going through the perimenopause transition, this could be a woman going through a fat loss phase, a younger woman that's in a show prep
Yeah.
or something like that. But let's just say, for instance, that you're down around 12 to maybe 1,400 calories, and there's not much that's happening. Maybe
Yeah.
you saw some initial fat loss. Maybe you've even lost 5, 10, 15, or 20 pounds, but you're starting to feel tired. Your sleep's probably beginning to be compromised. Your energy in the gym may be suffering. Your cycles went from being full to maybe being spotty, and you're just feeling fatigued all the time. What I would like to do is actually go ahead and say if your macros were, let's just say roughly 45 to 55-ish grams of fat, maybe 100 to maybe 120 grams of carbohydrate, and maybe 120 up to maybe 150 grams of protein. What I'll normally do is I will try to fill the energy gap that's created your opportunity for fat oxidation. What I mean by that is I will usually add between 75 up to maybe even 100 extra grams of carbohydrates for roughly 5 to 7 days. So that
Yeah.
would take you from 12 to 1400 calories up to about 4, 14, 15, 1600, 17, even up to 1800 calories. Now, there are some genetic outliers out there. I'm working with a gal right now, and she's eating 3,200 calories and can't gain anything. And I'm like, dude, what is going on? This is nuts. But that's usually what I like to do. And then I will also bias the increase in carbohydrate. Okay. Now, it's not uncommon for me during a diet break to maybe drop protein by maybe 20 grams, but that's only to be able to get more carbohydrate to go in so that I don't supersede their calorie allotment. Okay. So we're filling the energy gap, trying to get the calories back up, and then you're going to sit there for roughly about a week. What I would encourage you to do is take some of the kind of like a before inventory on how you feel, and then take an after inventory on how you feel. Do it, perform it, track your weight, make the adjustments we talked about on this podcast. And I would be surprised if there wasn't a favorable outcome. With regards to guys, it could be something very similar, but most of the time, you'll have a guy, if he's down in fat loss, somewhere probably around 16, 17, 1800, 1900, maybe even 2000 calories. And I would argue that most healthy men can lose a considerable amount of body fat, somewhere between 1800 and 2200 calories a day.
Yeah.
What I would do if their carbohydrates got down, 130, 150, somewhere around there. Again, I'd probably add in, similar 400 to 600 calories. So I'll go up with most of the men I coach because they just have more quality lean body mass. There's more stuff to fill. And just overall, their physiology is larger. And most of the time, also, their metabolisms usually operate around 300 to 500 calories higher than a woman's does. So again, I'll just fill that energy gap. I'll make the same adjustments for cardio, training, and lifestyle, and then I'll allow them to run that for about a week. And then usually after that, in both cases, we'll resort their calories back down to the calorie restriction, and they should keep on going with fat loss. Now, before I just leave you with that, fat loss, a fat loss phase is not intended to be forever. You cannot stay in fat loss for the rest of your life. Yes, every online influencer tells you calorie restriction is all that matters for fat loss. But I'm telling you right now, if you push a calorie restriction for long enough, you will get yourself down to if you're a woman, a 1300, 1200, 1100, 1200, and you will start to feel not well, let's just
Right.
say, right? In which time, I think then something like filling out an MSQ, a biofeedback questionnaire, something like that is a really good idea because most likely there's something going on internally that's preventing you from continuously getting leaner. And this is where I think the functional medicine side of it comes in, because then you can go ahead and you can get blood work done and you can assess, do you have hypothyroidism? Is your vitamin D down around a 15 or a 20? Is your progesterone a 0.1? Is your cortisol a 37 or a 27 or whatever? You can manage these things. And I would argue that anybody that's looking at partaking in a very aggressive fat loss phase or looking to really transform their lifestyle should probably get blood work done before, and you should get blood work done after. And then you can figure out what you need to fix so that you can properly recover yourself and actually maintain the fat loss that you worked so hard to be able to achieve.
Yeah. And if people want to learn more from you, what's the best way for them to learn more from you? Because you teach this at a very high level.
I appreciate that. So on Instagram, it is at the underscore educated underscore dieter. Our website is theeducatedDieter.com. I'm also on Facebook, William Grazione. We have a podcast called Hey Coach Radio that's available on Spotify and iTunes. We're at like 140 episodes now. And my email is william at theeducatedDieter.com.
Awesome. We've got all that in the show notes. So, Lisa, do you have anything that you want to ask of Will before we wrap up?
No, thanks so much, Will. Honestly, this was a great conversation and you added a ton of value. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. It was a lot of fun.